The first sign was something small. Barely a flicker, really. Claire had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and I happened to glance at the screen when a notification popped up. Looking forward to our next session. I dismissed it at first. After all, could have been anyone. Maybe her boss, a coworker, or even one of those quirky clients she liked to complain about. But my gut stirred uneasily. Why the winking face? I shook it off. Claire had always been private, but not secretive. She was too busy for drama, always rushing from one project to the next. This was the woman I married, pragmatic, driven, loyal. So why did I feel the walls of our home shifting, as though something I couldn't name had crept into the foundation? A few weeks later, the cracks deepened. Claire started working late, too late for someone who had always valued her evenings. She'd come home flushed, energized in a way I hadn't seen in years, but when I asked about her day, her answers were vague. Meetings, she'd say, or it's just been crazy lately. Then she'd disappear into the shower for what felt like hours. I tried to rationalize it. The extra effort could be tied to her big pitch, the one she'd been working toward for months. But when I asked her how it was coming along, she brushed me off. "It's fine. Don't worry about it," she said, her voice clipped. That's when I started to notice the gaps, the odd silences where there used to be conversation, the way she seemed to withdraw, even as she smiled at me from across the dinner table. Doubt turned to anxiety. I told myself I was imagining things, but the excuses piled up. A business trip she hadn't mentioned until the night before. Calls she took in hushed tones, slipping into the study with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She'd become a stranger in our home, and I didn't know how to reach her. The final blow came when I decided to surprise her at work. I'd made up my mind to take her out for lunch, hoping to rekindle some of the warmth we'd lost. I stopped by her office with a bouquet of flowers, but when I walked in, her desk was empty. "She's not in today," one of her coworkers said, looking puzzled. She told us she was working remotely. My stomach dropped. I managed to thank them and leave without making a scene, but by the time I got to my car, my hands were shaking. I stared at the flowers on the passenger seat, their petals vibrant and mocking. Where was she? The question clawed at me for hours. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. When she finally came home that evening, I asked her how her day had been. She smiled brightly. "Productive," she said, kissing me on the cheek. The lie burned like acid. That night, as Claire slept beside me, I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head. My mind felt like a jigsaw puzzle with pieces deliberately missing. I hated what I was becoming. The suspicious husband, the snoop, but I had to know. I had to see. It wasn't hard to guess her phone's password. My heart raced as I unlocked it, scrolling through her messages, my hands trembling. That's when I saw the thread with Ramon. The messages weren't overtly romantic, but they didn't need to be. Inside jokes, late-night chats, and too many emojis for it to be professional. And then, buried halfway through the thread, a message that turned my stomach to stone. "Can't wait to see you in Barcelona. This week will be unforgettable." I couldn't breathe. My hands tightened around the phone as I stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of my eyes. She was going to Barcelona? She hadn't mentioned that to me. When was this planned? Why hadn't she told me? The betrayal hit me like a wave, pulling me under. But alongside the heartbreak came something else, anger. Cold, searing anger that hardened my resolve. I glanced at Claire, her face peaceful in sleep, as if nothing had changed. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Had she always been this good at lying? Or had I just been too blind to see it? I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. If she thought she could hide this from me, she was wrong. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had more. Not until I was ready to expose whatever this was. The seeds of a plan began to form in my mind. I'd find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. If she was going to Barcelona, so was I. The realization hit me like an unseen punch. After reading the texts, I sat there in the dark, her phone resting on the nightstand as if it hadn't just detonated a bomb in our bedroom. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by Claire's soft, steady breathing beside me. My world, the life I thought I knew, was unraveling thread by thread. Doubt clawed at the edges of my mind. Could I be wrong? Was it possible that I was misinterpreting everything? Maybe R was just a particularly enthusiastic tutor. Maybe the message about Barcelona wasn't as damning as it sounded. My heart begged for these explanations, but my gut told me the truth. People don't hide honesty behind emojis and secret trips. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, trying to stay calm. My chest ached, but it wasn't the kind of pain you can rub away. It was a hollowing, a deep, suffocating emptiness that made each breath feel like a chore. I wanted to wake her up, to demand answers, but something held me back. Fear, maybe, or pride. The voice in my head whispered, "Not yet." The next day was a blur of routine painted over a canvas of chaos. Claire acted as though nothing had happened, as though her phone hadn't betrayed her in the dead of night. She smiled when she kissed me goodbye, coffee in hand, heading off to work, or wherever she was really going. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my own untouched mug. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the faint scratches on the wooden surface, the remnants of years of shared meals, laughter, and spilled drinks. It felt foreign now, this life we'd built, a facade. I needed proof, not just for closure, but for clarity. Because even in my anger, I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of her. Not yet. Maybe if I found the truth, I could understand. Maybe it wasn't too late to fix us. The revelation came that evening. Claire was in the shower again, a ritual she'd taken to with obsessive regularity these days. Steam billowed from under the bathroom door, muffling the faint strains of her humming. My opportunity was slipping away, and I knew it. I opened her laptop, my fingers trembling. She used it for work, but I'd seen her answer emails and log into her tutoring sessions on it before. If there was more to find, it would be here. At first, nothing jumped out. Work files, spreadsheets, a slideshow about market trends. But as I dug deeper, I found a folder buried under layers of subfolders. Its name was innocuous, Travel Plans. My pulse quickened as I opened it. There it was, an itinerary for her trip to Barcelona. Flights, hotel bookings, reservations at a restaurant called El Cielo Azul. I felt my throat tighten as I read the last detail, a booking for two. My mind reeled. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Or maybe she thought I'd never look. My hands shook as I scrolled further. Pictures. Screenshots of her video calls with Ramon, a dark-haired man with sharp features and an easy smile. They looked comfortable, familiar. But it was the last image that gutted me. A photo of Claire standing in front of what looked like Ramon's apartment door, the address scrawled neatly in the corner of the screen. She was smiling, her hair loose around her shoulders, a look of anticipation lighting up her face. I'd never seen that smile before, not directed at me. By the time Claire emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, I'd already closed the laptop and shoved it back onto the desk. I couldn't face her, not yet. My chest burned with anger, humiliation, and something darker I didn't want to name. She kissed my cheek as she passed, her damp hair brushing my face. "You okay?" she asked, her tone light, almost indifferent. "Yeah." I lied, my voice strained. "Just tired." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pictures, the itinerary, the door with the address burned into my memory. I wanted to scream, to tear through the illusion we were living in, but I forced myself to stay still, careful. I needed a plan. Confronting her now wouldn't change anything. It might even tip her off. No, if I wanted to understand the full scope of her betrayal, I had to go deeper. And I knew where to start: Barcelona. The next morning, after Claire left for work, I booked my flight. One way. As I closed my laptop, a sense of grim resolve settled over me. This was no longer about salvaging our marriage, or even understanding her choices. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I stared at the calendar on the wall, the dates blurring together. 2 weeks until she left for Spain. 2 weeks to prepare myself for whatever I'd find when I got there. I stood in the empty kitchen, the silence pressing down like a weight. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed, jarring me from my thoughts. The clock ticked steadily, a reminder of time slipping away. 2 weeks. Then I'd know everything. The days blurred together as I prepared for the trip to Barcelona. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life play out in front of me. I went through the motions at work, smiled at neighbors, and even held normal conversations with Claire. But beneath the surface, I was a man on a mission. Every interaction tinged with a bitterness I couldn't shake. I spent my nights combing through every detail I could find. Her emails, her messages, even her travel plans. The more I uncovered, the more methodical I became. I booked a flight to arrive a day after hers, ensuring I'd have time to get my bearings without alerting her. I reserved a room at a nondescript hotel near the one she'd chosen. This wasn't just a trip, it was reconnaissance. Still, there was a part of me, small but stubborn, that hoped I'd arrive and find nothing but an innocent misunderstanding. Maybe Ramon really was just a charismatic tutor. Maybe the restaurant reservation was a coincidence. But that hope eroded every time I replayed the images in my head. The plan was simple: follow her, observe, document. But as I pored over her itinerary again, something caught my eye that I'd missed before. A second email, separate from the official booking confirmation. It was from Ramon. Subject: our escape plan. My blood turned to ice. The email was short and sweet. Can't wait to see you. Everything's set for Saturday night. It'll just be us. No distractions. Love you, R. Love you. Those 2 words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. Any shred of doubt I'd clung to was gone. This wasn't just an affair. This was a full-blown romance, complete with secret rendezvous and love notes. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. The discovery ignited something inside me. Rage, yes, but also determination. It wasn't enough to catch her in the act anymore. I needed to expose the whole sordid truth, to strip away the lies she'd wrapped around herself. I started compiling everything into a folder: screenshots of the emails, photos of their messages, even the blurry video recordings I'd taken of her leaving the house at odd hours. If Claire wanted to pretend she was blameless, I'd make sure she couldn't. But as I was sorting through the files, I found something that stopped me cold. A voice recording. It was buried in her cloud storage, labeled with nothing but a date. My curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked play. Claire's voice came through, soft and hesitant. I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's hard, Ramon. He doesn't deserve this. Ramon's reply was low and smooth, tinged with amusement. You've said that before, but you always come back. You don't love him, Claire. You love me. Silence. Then a shaky breath from Claire. I just wish it wasn't so messy. If only he'd. The recording ended abruptly, cutting off whatever she was about to say. My mind raced, filling in the blanks. What was messy? What had she been about to admit? And how long had she been planning this with him? The weight of it all crashed down on me, an avalanche of pain and anger I couldn't contain. For years, I'd trusted her. I'd believed in her dreams, supported her career, and built a life around the idea that we were partners. And now, it felt like I'd been walking blindfolded toward a cliff edge, with Claire guiding me the entire way. I paced the kitchen, my hands balled into fists. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to shove the evidence in her face and demand an explanation. But I knew that wouldn't get me the answers I needed. Instead, I let the anger burn itself into resolve. Saturday night. That was when she and Ramon planned their escape. Whatever that meant, I'd be there to see it. That evening, as Claire came home with her usual breezy smile, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every gesture, every laugh, felt like a performance, rehearsed to keep me in the dark. Something wrong? She asked, her tone light but tinged with concern. I forced a smile, shaking my head. No, just tired. She kissed me on the cheek, lingering for a moment as if sensing something was off. But I stayed silent, my heart a storm beneath the surface. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind churned with unanswered questions. What was she running from? Was she planning to leave me entirely? And if so, why hadn't she already? But one thing was certain. When she boarded that plane, I'd be right behind her. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. The truth was coming, and I was ready to face it, no matter how devastating it might be. The confrontation wasn't planned, not like this. I had intended to wait until Barcelona, where the truth could unfold without the safety net of her denials. But when Claire came home that evening, humming a tune and radiating the easy confidence of someone with no idea her world was about to crumble, I couldn't hold back. "Who's Ramon?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze mid-step, her keys dangling from her hand. The smile faded from her lips, replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Panic? Guilt? "What?" she said, her tone careful. Too careful. I stood, holding up her phone. I had left it open to the email she hadn't bothered to delete. The subject line, "Our escape plan," glared like an accusation in the dim light. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. Instead, she played her usual card, dismissal. "That's work-related," she said, her voice steady but her hands fidgeting. "Ramon is part of a project I've been coordinating. It's nothing, really." "Nothing?" I snapped, my anger rising. "So, you're telling me the candlelit dinners and escape plans are part of a business strategy? Or are you expanding your portfolio into infidelity?" The words hung between us, sharp and final. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability beneath the facade. But it wasn't remorse, it was fear. She knew she'd been caught. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think. Ramon and I. It's complicated." Complicated. A word that had no place in a marriage, at least not like this. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but she only crossed her arms and looked away. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice low and cold. She didn't answer right away, and the hesitation was a knife to my chest. When she finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "I don't know." That was all I needed to hear. The rest of the night passed in a haze. Claire tried to talk, to explain, but her words were empty, skirting around the truth like a politician avoiding scandal. I stopped listening halfway through and retreated to the guest room, where the walls felt like they were closing in. Lying in the darkness, her words replayed in my head on an endless loop. It's complicated. What did that even mean? That she wasn't sure if she loved me anymore? That she wanted to leave, but couldn't bring herself to say it? The ambiguity was maddening, leaving me to fill in the gaps with my worst fears. But beneath the pain, something else simmered, determination. This wasn't over, not yet. The next morning, as Claire moved quietly around the house, I made a decision. If she wouldn't give me answers, I'd find them myself. I returned to her laptop after she left for work. This time, I dug deeper, combing through her browser history and emails. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a message thread she hadn't archived. The emails weren't between her and Ramon. They were between her and a lawyer. My stomach twisted as I read the exchange. Claire had been researching international divorce proceedings, specifically ones involving financial assets. One email, dated 2 weeks ago, outlined a potential division of property and asked about offshore accounts. The shock of it was like being doused with ice water. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning her exit. And she was being thorough. The realization hit hard, but with it came clarity. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle the life we'd built together. For the first time, I saw her actions for what they were, not mistakes, but choices. The rage I felt was almost blinding, but I forced myself to stay calm. If Claire thought she could play me, she was wrong. If she wanted to strategize, then I'd strategize harder. I sat down at my desk and started making calls. A lawyer of my own, a private investigator, people who could help me protect myself from the person I thought would never hurt me. By the time Claire came home that evening, I had already started to put my plan in motion. She greeted me cautiously, her eyes scanning my face for signs of what I was thinking. I gave her nothing. Instead, I smiled, a hollow, calculated smile. "How was work?" I asked, as if nothing had changed. She hesitated but eventually answered, slipping back into her role as the devoted wife. But as she talked, I saw her for who she really was, an actress in a play she thought she was directing. Later that night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought her secrets were safe. But the game had changed. My next move was clear. I wasn't just going to Barcelona to catch her. I was going to destroy the carefully constructed web she'd spun around me. And this time, I'd make sure she didn't see it coming. The house felt suffocating in its stillness. I sat in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the glossy surface of my untouched coffee, my thoughts spiraling. The evidence I'd uncovered played over and over in my head like a twisted movie reel. Her texts, her emails, her whispered words to Ramon. I'd built a life around Claire, trusted her with my heart, and she traded it in for a fantasy. But the rage I'd felt before was different now. It wasn't fire anymore. It was cold, heavy, and exhausting. I realized I was no longer just angry at Claire. I was angry at myself. How had I not seen this coming? Had I been too trusting, too eager to believe in the story we told the world about our perfect marriage? The weight of my own complicity crushed me, dragging me deeper into a pit I wasn't sure I could climb out of. I pressed my hands to my face, shutting out the morning light streaming through the window. For years, I defined myself through our relationship, her ambitions, her successes, even her happiness. Now I wasn't sure where she ended and I began. An unexpected knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. It was a package delivery, Claire's name on the label. The driver handed it over with a polite nod, oblivious to the emotional storm raging behind my forced smile. Back in the kitchen, I set the box on the table, staring at it as if it might explode. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about opening her mail, but today, curiosity and a simmering resentment got the better of me. The contents weren't what I expected. Inside was a sleek leather-bound journal and an engraved pin. Both were marked with Ramon's initials. My stomach churned. This wasn't a gift from a tutor to a student. It was intimate, personal, like something you'd give someone you loved. But it wasn't just the journal itself that rattled me. It was the note tucked inside the cover, handwritten in Claire's unmistakable script. For the moments we'll never forget. Yours always, C. The words hit like a gut punch. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was crafting an entirely separate life with Ramon, complete with private jokes and tokens of affection. The journal wasn't just a gift. It was a monument to the time they'd stolen from me. I slammed the journal shut, shoving it back into the box as if that would erase what I'd seen. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to process the betrayal, but it was no longer the betrayal itself that consumed me. It was the realization that I'd been holding on to something that was already gone. I'd spent weeks chasing proof, hoping to find something that would justify my pain, but all I'd done was cling to a ghost of the woman I thought Claire was. The woman I'd loved didn't exist anymore, or maybe she never had. That thought scared me more than the affair. I paced the kitchen, the journal's weight bearing down on me from the table. My instinct screamed at me to confront her, to throw the evidence in her face and demand answers. But what would that accomplish? Another argument? More lies? I had to let go of the idea that I could fix this. That evening, I found myself sitting in the living room with a bottle of whiskey, the glass in my hand reflecting the soft glow of the fireplace. Claire was out again, late meeting, and for the first time, I didn't care where she was. Instead, I thought about myself, about what I wanted. The anger and sadness were still there, but beneath them was something unexpected. Clarity. Claire's actions had forced me to confront a truth I'd avoided for years. I'd let my identity get swallowed by hers, become a shadow of the man I once was. If she'd abandoned me emotionally, then maybe it was time for me to abandon the idea of us. By the time Claire came home, I had made my decision. She walked into the living room, pausing when she saw me sitting in the flickering light. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thicker than ever. "I didn't expect you to wait up," she said cautiously, as if testing the waters. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the warmth settle in my chest before responding. I needed time to think. About what? I set the glass down deliberately, meeting her eyes. About what I want. The words lingered, heavy and loaded with meaning. Claire shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of looking away. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a declaration. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was in control. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, caught in the weight of my words. Her smile faltered, replaced by the wary expression of someone realizing the rules of the game had changed. "You've been distant," she said finally, closing the door behind her. "Is there something you want to talk about?" The hypocrisy was laughable. I felt a bitter smile tug at the corner of my lips. "I could ask you the same thing." Her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on my knees. "It means I'm done pretending this is normal. Late nights, business trips, the tutor. You don't even try to hide it anymore." Her face paled, but she recovered quickly, crossing her arms in that defensive way she always did when cornered. "You're being paranoid." The room seemed to tighten around us, the tension thick and suffocating. I stood, closing the distance between us. "Am I?" I asked, my voice steady but low. "Because I've seen the emails, Claire. I've heard the recordings. Ramon, the escape plans, the hotel for two. So tell me, what exactly am I being paranoid about?" Her eyes widened, panic flickering before she masked it with indignation. "You went through my stuff?" "Don't," I snapped, my tone cutting through her attempted deflection. "Don't make this about privacy or trust. You shattered that the moment you decided I wasn't enough." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked away, her jaw tightening. I thought she might finally break, offer some shred of honesty. Instead, she doubled down. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling but still laced with defiance. It's not what you think." I laughed, the sound bitter and humorless. "Then enlighten me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been screwing your tutor and planning a future without me." Her expression cracked, and for a moment, I saw something raw and vulnerable beneath the surface. But instead of an apology, she lashed out. "You think this is all my fault?" She shot back, her voice rising. "Do you even realize how hard it's been? You're so caught up in your own little world, you don't see what I need, what I've been missing." Her words hit like a slap. Any lingering hope I'd had for reconciliation evaporated. She wasn't sorry. She was justifying it. The argument spiraled, voices bouncing off the walls until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. The cold night air hit my face, but it did little to cool the fire raging inside me. I walked without a destination, my mind racing. Her words repeated like a broken record. What I've been missing. What about what I'd been missing? The trust, the partnership, the life we were supposed to be building together. Was I just collateral damage in her pursuit of something better? I stopped at the corner of our street, breathing heavily. This wasn't working. The passive investigations, the quiet suffering, they weren't enough anymore. If I wanted answers, I'd have to take them. By the time I returned home, the house was quiet. Claire was upstairs, the light in the bedroom casting a faint glow into the hallway. I didn't bother going to bed. Instead, I went straight to my study, closing the door behind me. I opened my laptop and logged into the tracking software I'd installed on her phone earlier that week. I hadn't wanted to resort to this, but after tonight, I didn't care. She'd forced my hand. The screen loaded, displaying her location history, messages, and calls. Most of it was predictable, trips to her office, grocery runs, but one address stood out. She'd been to the same apartment building 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Ramon's apartment. I clicked on the address, my heart pounding as I memorized the location. If I needed confirmation, this was it. As I stared at the screen, my resolve hardened. I wasn't waiting for her to slip away anymore. I wasn't giving her the chance to keep hiding. Tomorrow, I'd take the next flight to Barcelona. No more lies. No more waiting. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming the truth and myself. The realization came as I sat alone in the terminal, the muted hum of announcements and chatter blending into a low buzz around me. My ticket to Barcelona rested on my lap, the ink still fresh from the kiosk. This wasn't just a trip. It was the first step toward tearing down the carefully constructed facade of my life. The plane would take off in an hour, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of control. No more waiting, no more guessing. I was done being the passive bystander in my own story. But as I stared out at the tarmac, a darker thought crept in. What if I was wrong? What if confronting her like this only made me look desperate? The fear twisted in my chest, but I forced it down. This wasn't about saving face. It was about saving myself. I couldn't keep living in limbo, pretending the cracks in our marriage were anything but chasms. Whatever I found in Barcelona, I'd face it head-on. The flight was long, giving me too much time to think. I replayed our last argument, dissecting Claire's words for hidden meanings. You don't understand. It's not what you think. What did that even mean? Was she trying to excuse herself, or was there something I'd missed? By the time the plane touched down, my nerves were raw. I stepped into the bustling airport, the unfamiliar sounds of Spanish swirling around me, and pulled out my phone. Claire's flight had landed hours ago, and according to the tracking software, she was at a boutique hotel in the Gothic Quarter. It wasn't hard to find the place. Barcelona's narrow streets seemed to close in around me as I walked, the bright afternoon sun doing little to ease the tension tightening my chest. When I arrived, I stood across the street, staring up at the quaint, ivy-covered facade. She was in there, with him. My pulse quickened as I crossed the street and stepped inside. The lobby was small and tastefully decorated, a mix of old-world charm and modern touches. A young woman at the front desk greeted me in Spanish, her warm smile faltering as I stared past her, scanning the room. I'm looking for a guest, I said, switching to English. Claire Roberts. The receptionist's brow furrowed. I'm sorry, but we can't give out information about our guests. Of course. I should have expected that. I forced a polite smile and nodded. Thank you. I stepped away from the desk, retreating to a corner where I could think. My mind raced with options, none of them ideal. I couldn't exactly demand to see her, or barge into the hotel without a plan. Then, as I glanced toward the stairs, I saw her. Claire. She was descending slowly, her face relaxed, her movements unhurried. She wore a dress I'd never seen before, something flowing and elegant that seemed out of place for someone who was here for work. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy looking at the man trailing behind her, Ramon. He was even more insufferable in person than in his photos. Tall, dark-haired, and confident in a way that made my skin crawl. They paused near the lobby entrance, and she leaned in close to say something, her hand brushing his arm. He laughed softly, his expression a mix of amusement and affection. It was the kind of laugh she used to reserve for me. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, closing the distance before my brain could catch up to my body. Claire. Her head whipped around, her eyes widening as she saw me. For a brief moment, there was no mask, no calculated calm, just raw shock. Jason, she said, her voice barely audible. Ramon tensed beside her, his easy confidence replaced with wary confusion. Who's this? He asked, his accent thick but clear. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Claire. So, this is what expanding your career looks like? Her face paled, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for an explanation. It's not what you think, she stammered, falling back on the same tired excuse. I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Save it, Claire. I've seen the emails, the reservations, the messages. Do you have any idea how pathetic you made me feel? Sitting at home, wondering what I'd done wrong, while you were building a whole new life. Her expression flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, but Ramon stepped forward, his posture defensive. You need to leave, he said firmly. I turned to him, my anger boiling over. And you need to mind your own business. This is between me and my wife. The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, none of us moved, the tension thick enough to choke on. Claire reached out, her hand brushing Ramon's arm. Please, she whispered, her voice pleading. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I could feel the stares of the staff, the guests milling about the lobby, but I didn't care. Turning on my heel, I walked out of the hotel, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I hadn't planned this. I'd wanted to wait, to gather more evidence, to control the narrative. But seeing them together, Seeing her touch him the way she used to touch me, it was too much. As I stood outside, catching my breath, I realized this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She thought she could walk away unscathed, but she'd underestimated me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The icy wind cut through my jacket as I stood outside the hotel, my breath visible in the chilled Barcelona air. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, doubt, but one thought cut through the noise. This wasn't over. I had walked away from the confrontation in the lobby, but I wasn't done. Ramon might have thought he'd won, standing there with his polished arrogance and Claire's hand on his arm. But this wasn't a game to win or lose. This was my life, my marriage, and if Claire thought she could erase me with a plane ticket and a charming smile, she was wrong. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire in my chest. Then I turned back toward the hotel, determination steadying my steps. The receptionist looked up, her brows knitting in concern as I approached. "Excuse me," I said, my voice firmer now. "I need to speak with Claire Roberts." Room 312. Her lips parted, a protest forming, but I cut her off. "This is a private matter. I'm her husband." There was no room for argument in my tone, and her hesitation gave way to a small nod. She gestured toward the elevator. I didn't thank her. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, the hum of the machinery echoing in the small space. I stared at my reflection in the polished doors, noting the tension in my jaw, the shadows under my eyes. Who was I becoming? When the elevator chimed and the doors slid open, I stepped into the quiet hallway, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. Room 312 was at the end, the number gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, I hesitated. My mind flashed with images of what I might find behind that door. Her laughter, his touch, a reality I couldn't unsee. But I couldn't turn back now. I knocked. It took longer than it should have for Claire to answer, and when the door finally opened, she stood there, her expression a mix of shock and fear. "Jason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I pushed past her into the room, ignoring her protests. The air smelled faintly of perfume and something else, cologne, maybe. The bed was made, but just barely, as if someone had hastily straightened it before leaving. "Where is he?" I demanded, spinning to face her. Her eyes darted toward the adjoining bathroom, a flicker of panic betraying her calm facade. "Jason, this isn't." The bathroom door creaked open, and Ramon stepped out, his face a mask of feigned composure. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice calm but edged with condescension. I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You've got a lot of nerve," I said, taking a step closer. "Standing there like this isn't the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. You don't even have the decency to hide it anymore, Claire." Claire moved between us, her hands raised as if to shield Ramon. "Jason, please. Let's talk about this." "Talk?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "We're past talking. You want to explain why you're here with him, while I'm at home holding our life together. Or should I ask your lawyer instead? You know, the one you've been emailing about offshore accounts." Her face blanched, and Ramon frowned, glancing at her. "Claire?" Her shoulders sagged, the weight of the truth dragging her down. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said, her voice trembling. I stared at her, waiting for the explanation, the justification, anything to make sense of this mess. But all I got was silence. "You didn't mean for me to find out," I repeated, my voice quieter now, colder. "That's your excuse?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, her hands twisting nervously. Ramon stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Maybe you should leave. Claire and I have things to discuss." It was the wrong thing to say. My fists clenched, but I didn't lash out, not yet. Instead, I turned to Claire. "Is this what you want?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts. "Is this who you're leaving me for? A man who doesn't even have the guts to speak unless you're here to back him up?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. That silence said everything. The moment stretched, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. I took a step back, the fire in my chest giving way to a hollow ache. You made your choice, I said, my voice steady now. But don't think for a second that this is over. You want to leave? Fine. But you're not walking away clean. I turned and walked out, ignoring Ramon's muttered words and Claire's soft plea of, Jason, wait. Back on the street, the cold air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain. My mind raced, the next steps forming like a battle plan. Claire thought she could move on, but she hadn't accounted for me. She wasn't taking my life, my home, or my dignity without a fight. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my next move. The morning sunlight filtered through the cafe window, casting long shadows across the polished table. I stared at my untouched coffee, the steam rising in faint curls, and wondered how something so ordinary could feel like a monument to change. It had been 2 days since I walked out of that hotel room. 2 days of wrestling with every emotion imaginable: rage, heartbreak, guilt, and a strange sense of relief. For years, I had built my life around Claire, believing our marriage was unshakable, a foundation that could weather anything. But now, sitting here alone in a foreign city, I understood that the cracks had always been there. I had just chosen not to see them. I glanced down at my phone. Claire's messages were piling up, unread. Apologies, excuses, pleas for me to come back and talk. She was grasping at the remnants of a relationship she had already destroyed, but I didn't feel the same pull I once did. For the first time, I felt free. The door to the cafe opened, and Claire stepped inside. She spotted me immediately, her hesitant smile fading when she saw the expression on my face. Jason, she said, walking toward me. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a way that reminded me of better days. But those days were gone, and I didn't feel the ache I thought I would seeing her again. I gestured to the seat across from me, my voice calm. Sit. She obeyed, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I'm glad you agreed to meet, she began, her voice tentative. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I studied her, noticing the way her gaze darted between me and the table, like she was searching for an opening. You wanted to talk, I said finally. So talk. She took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. Jason, I never meant to hurt you. Ramon, it just happened. I was lost, and he made me feel. Her words trailed off, and she wiped at her eyes. I don't know how we got here, but I don't want to lose you. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Her voice cracked, and for a brief moment, the old part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in her, almost responded. But then I remembered the emails, the journal, the lies, the choice she had already made. You don't want to lose me, I repeated, my tone flat. Claire, you already did. She flinched, her tears falling freely now. Don't say that. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. We'll go together. I shook my head. This isn't something you fix. You didn't just break my trust, Claire. You broke us, and I can't come back from that. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint clatter of dishes from behind the counter. Claire leaned back in her chair, defeated. I loved you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, feeling a strange calm wash over me. And I loved you. But love isn't enough when there's no respect or honesty. Her tears blurred her features, but I didn't reach out to comfort her. This was her moment to feel the consequences of her choices, and it was my moment to walk away. When she finally left the cafe, her figure disappearing into the bustling street outside, I felt a strange lightness. The grief was still there, but it wasn't consuming anymore. It was manageable, a wound that would heal with time. I looked down at the divorce papers I'd brought with me, still unsigned. I pulled out a pen and scrawled my name at the bottom, the ink drying as the finality of the gesture sank in. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined for us, but it was an ending I needed. I stepped out of the cafe into the vibrant streets of Barcelona. The city buzzed with life, its energy a sharp contrast to the turmoil I'd been carrying. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to face it. Claire had been my anchor, my compass, and my blind spot. Letting her go felt like stepping into the unknown, but it also felt like freedom. I turned a corner, the sun warm on my face, and smiled faintly. Barcelona stretched out before me, its skyline glowing in the amber light of dusk. I stood on a small balcony overlooking the city, the sound of distant conversations and laughter rising from the streets below. It felt fitting, somehow, to be here at this moment, a place steeped in history, beauty, and reinvention. My journey had been nothing like I imagined. I'd come here seeking the truth, thinking it would set me free, but the freedom hadn't come from answers. It had come from letting go of the questions. Claire had been a part of my life for so long that I wasn't sure who I was without her. But now, I realized I didn't need to define myself by what we had, or what we lost. Her betrayal had taken so much, but it had also given me something I hadn't expected, the courage to start over. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small leather-bound journal I'd taken from her room at the hotel. It was the same one Ramon had given her, a symbol of their time together, of all the secrets she'd hidden from me. For days, I debated what to do with it. Throw it in the trash, burn it, confront her with it one last time. Instead, I turned it over in my hands, feeling the texture of the leather beneath my fingertips. Then, with a steady breath, I walked back inside and placed it on the desk. It wasn't mine to hold on to anymore. Letting go didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean choosing not to carry the weight. The sound of a notification on my phone broke the silence. It was from the travel blog I'd been toying with for months, a dream I'd never had time to pursue while I was busy trying to hold together a crumbling marriage. "Are you ready to publish your first post?" I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the confirmation button. Writing had always been an escape for me, a way to process the chaos of life. Now, it felt like more than that. It felt like a doorway to something new. I clicked publish. The screen flashed with a cheerful notification, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled, genuinely, fully. This was mine. My words, my voice, my story. As the city lights flickered to life, I leaned against the balcony railing, letting the cool breeze wash over me. The past few weeks had been a storm, tearing apart everything I thought I knew. But storms clear eventually, and in their wake, they leave the ground fertile for something new. Tomorrow, I'd leave Barcelona. I didn't know where I was going yet, but for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't scare me. The horizon stretched before me, endless and full of promise. "Here's to a new beginning," I whispered, raising an imaginary toast to the night sky. And with that, I turned away from the city, ready to face whatever came next.